It happened in front of everyone. I was giving my weekly report when Jessica, my boss, cut me off mid-sentence and said, "You'll never be leadership material, Maya. You just don't have the presence." The entire conference room fell silent. 12 faces stared at me, waiting to see how I'd react. I froze for what felt like forever, then laughed a little, like it was some kind of joke. But everyone knew it wasn't. Jessica's eyes were cold and serious. She'd been waiting for this moment to put me in my place. I fumbled through the rest of my presentation, my voice shaking slightly as I talked about quarterly numbers that suddenly didn't seem to matter. When the meeting ended, people filed out quietly, avoiding eye contact with me. I sat there for a moment, staring at my laptop screen, feeling smaller than I'd ever felt in my life. 26 years old, college degree, 3 years of solid work experience, and my boss had just told an entire room of colleagues that I would never amount to anything. The worst part? I was starting to believe her. Jessica loved making me small. She'd interrupt me in meetings, take credit for my ideas, and call me the quiet one, like it was some kind of character flaw. I used to think if I worked hard enough, if I proved myself valuable enough, she'd stop. But she didn't. She never did. Every morning, I'd walk into that office hoping today would be different. Maybe today she'd acknowledge my contributions or treat me with basic respect. Instead, she'd assign me the worst projects, the impossible deadlines, the tasks nobody else wanted. When I'd finish them perfectly, she'd find something to criticize. "This needs more polish," she'd say, handing back reports I'd spent days perfecting. Or she'd take my work to upper management and present it as her own brilliant strategy. I watched from the sidelines as she got promoted twice in 2 years, climbing higher on ideas I'd generated. Meanwhile, I stayed exactly where I was, stuck in the same cubicle, watching younger, less qualified people get hired above me. Jessica had made it clear that as long as she was my boss, would never rise. When a team lead role opened up, I gave it everything I had. I trained the new intern, Ashley, for weeks, teaching her systems I'd created myself. I stayed late every night, polishing reports and developing new strategies. I even wrote a 15-page proposal on how to improve our department's efficiency. Jessica barely glanced at it before tossing it aside. When the promotion was announced, she gave the job to Ashley, the same intern who couldn't even finish a sentence without asking me for help. "Ashley has natural leadership qualities," Jessica announced to the team. I sat there, stunned, watching Ashley beam with pride while accepting congratulations from everyone. Natural leadership qualities. Ashley, who had worked there for exactly 3 months and still asked me how to use basic Excel functions. Ashley, who I had personally trained on every aspect of the job she was now being promoted to lead. That night, I went home and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, wondering what was wrong with me. Why wasn't I good enough? What did Ashley have that I didn't? The answer, I realized, was simple: Ashley wasn't a threat to Jessica. I locked myself in a bathroom stall and cried quietly into my hands. Not because I didn't get the promotion, I'd half expected that disappointment by now. I was crying because I finally realized the truth: I'd never get promoted there. Not while Jessica was above me. She would make sure of it. She needed someone beneath her to make her feel powerful, and I was that someone. I was the office punching bag, the person she could blame when things went wrong and ignore when things went right. I heard the bathroom door open and recognized the clicking of heels. Someone paused outside my stall, probably recognizing my shoes under the door, then quietly left without saying anything. That made it worse somehow. Even my coworkers pitied me. I was 26 years old, and I'd become the person everyone felt sorry for but nobody wanted to help. I wiped my tears and walked back to my desk, sitting down like nothing had happened. But something inside me had shifted. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep letting Jessica destroy my confidence and steal my future. At home that night, I opened a dusty tab on my laptop that I'd forgotten was there. It was a small blog I'd started for fun last year, helping women juggle side hustles and manage their careers. I hadn't updated it in months, too exhausted from my real job to maintain it. But sitting there in my browser was an unread email from 2 weeks ago. "Hi Maya," it read. "I love your content about workplace confidence. Would you be interested in consulting for my startup? I could pay $600 for a strategy session." I stared at the message, my heart racing. $600 for a few hours of work? That was almost what I made in a week at the company. I'd completely forgotten that I'd put myself out there as a consultant, back when I still believed I had something valuable to offer. The email was from a woman named Rachel who was launching a tech startup and needed help with team management. She'd found my blog through a Google search and thought my approach was exactly what her company needed. I read the email 3 times, hardly believing it was real. I took the job. 2 hours later, after a video call with Rachel and her co-founder, I'd made $1,200. $1,200 for sharing ideas that came naturally to me, for giving advice that felt obvious but apparently wasn't. I stared at the PayPal notification on my phone, mouth open in disbelief. This was almost what I made in a week at my regular job, and I'd earned it in 2 hours by just being myself. Rachel had hung on every word I said, taking notes frantically and calling my suggestions brilliant and exactly what we needed to hear. For the first time in years, someone was treating me like I actually knew what I was talking about. They implemented my recommendations immediately and emailed me updates over the next few days, thanking me again and again for my insights. Wait, I thought, sitting in my small apartment and looking at my bank account. This could actually be something. Maybe I wasn't as worthless as Jessica made me feel. Maybe I did have value, just not in her toxic little world. I kept my 9-to-5 job, but I started waking up earlier and going to sleep later. I took consulting calls during my lunch breaks, hiding in my car or finding empty conference rooms. I didn't tell a soul about what I was doing, especially not Jessica. It felt like I had a secret superpower that nobody knew about. During the day, I was still the quiet, overlooked employee who got interrupted in meetings and blamed for other people's mistakes. But at night and on weekends, I was Maya the consultant, the expert that startups called when they needed real solutions. I helped a dozen companies over the next 2 months, earning more from my side work than my full-time salary. Each client treated me with respect, valued my opinions, and paid me well for my time. It was like living in 2 different worlds. One where I was invisible and worthless, and another where I was valuable and appreciated. The contrast was jarring, but it was also eye-opening. The problem wasn't me. The problem was Jessica and the toxic environment she'd created. Jessica found a new way to humiliate me at the monthly team meeting. She looked me up and down in front of HR and said, "Maya, if you want people to take you seriously as a leader someday, try not dressing like a broke intern." I was wearing my best blazer. The navy blue one I'd bought for my first job interview and saved for important occasions. It wasn't expensive, but it was professional and clean. Everyone in the room looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact. I laughed and nodded like it was helpful feedback, but my hands were shaking under the table. After the meeting, I went to the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked fine. I looked professional. But Jessica had a talent for making me doubt everything about myself, even things I knew weren't true. That night, I had 3 client calls and made $2,000 in consulting fees. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who said I dressed like a broke intern had no idea I was making more money than she was. At the company holiday party, I overheard Jessica talking to the HR director by the bar. "Maya's fine for basic tasks," she was saying, stirring her drink with a plastic stirrer. "She's reliable and doesn't cause trouble. But she's just not going anywhere, you know? Some people are natural followers." I stood there, invisible as always, holding my cup of punch and listening to my boss casually discuss my complete lack of potential with the person who handled promotions. The HR director nodded sympathetically, like they were discussing a family pet with limited intelligence. I smiled, finished my drink, and calmly walked to the bathroom. Once inside, I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my best client. "I'm ready to grow this into something bigger. Rachel responded immediately, yes. I've been hoping you'd say that. Let's talk tomorrow about expanding your role. I put my phone away and returned to the party, chatting pleasantly with coworkers who had no idea that their overlooked colleague was about to become their competition. I hired my first virtual assistant, then a second one. I wasn't just freelancing anymore. I was building a team. I was managing people, delegating tasks, and making strategic decisions about my growing business. It felt incredible to be in charge, to set standards and see them met, to have people look to me for guidance instead of dismissing my ideas. When Jessica assigned me extra weekend work, I politely declined. Sorry, I have prior commitments, I said, not elaborating. The look on her face was priceless, pure confusion mixed with irritation. For 3 years, I'd never said no to anything. I'd worked late, come in on weekends, and taken on impossible projects without complaint. But now I had something more important to do with my time. My consulting business was growing rapidly, and I needed to focus on clients who actually valued what I brought to the table. Jessica stared at me for a long moment, clearly trying to process this new version of Maya who had boundaries and priorities that didn't revolve around her demands. The turning point came when Jessica handed me a disaster project with an impossible deadline. This is a lot, she said, dropping a thick folder on my desk. Probably too much for someone at your level. But I need it done by Friday. It was Tuesday afternoon. The project would require at least 60 hours of work, and she was giving me 3 days. In the past, I would have stayed up all night and somehow made it happen, probably missing important family events and sacrificing my health in the process. Instead, I picked up the folder, flipped through it briefly, and handed it back to her. Sorry, I'm stretched thin right now, I said calmly. I won't be able to take this on. Jessica's mouth fell open. She literally couldn't speak for a moment. I used to beg for extra work, desperate to prove myself worthy of her approval. Now I was turning down assignments like I had better things to do. Which, of course, I did. The entire office watched this exchange with fascination, sensing that something fundamental had shifted in the power dynamic they'd grown accustomed to observing. That night, I pulled out my employment contract and read every word carefully. No non-compete clause. No restrictions on working in my industry. I called a lawyer friend just to be absolutely sure. You're completely free to leave and start competing tomorrow if you want, she confirmed. They have no legal hold over you whatsoever. I felt a surge of power I'd never experienced before. For years, I'd felt trapped, like I had no options and nowhere to go. Jessica had made me believe that I was unemployable anywhere else, that I should be grateful for the scraps she threw me. But I wasn't trapped at all. I was free to leave whenever I chose, and I'd built a successful business that was already earning more than my salary. All I had to do now was walk away from the job that was slowly destroying my self-worth and embrace the future I was building for myself. The only question was timing, and I wanted to make sure I did it right. My resignation email was short and professional. Dear Jessica, I wrote. Thank you for the opportunity to work with the team. I've accepted a new direction in my career that aligns better with my long-term goals. My last day will be Friday, December 15th. I'll ensure all my current projects are completed or properly transitioned before then. Best regards, Maya. I hit send at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday and immediately felt lighter. Jessica didn't respond for 6 hours. When she finally did, she didn't reply to me directly, she just forwarded my email to HR with a single word, finally. Typical Jessica. Even my resignation was about her, apparently providing her with some kind of relief or vindication. I'd never know what she meant by that comment, and honestly, I didn't care. I was done trying to decode her motivations or understand why she'd spent 3 years making my life miserable. All that mattered now was that in 3 days, I'd never have to see her face again. The day I left, I didn't cry or make any grand speeches. I cleaned out my desk quietly, putting 3 years of accumulated items into a small cardboard box. Jessica didn't say goodbye. She barely looked at me as I walked past her office with my belongings. A few coworkers stopped by to wish me well, asking vague questions about what I'd be doing next. I kept my answers simple. I'm starting my own consulting business. Most of them seemed surprised, probably wondering when quiet, overlooked Maya had developed enough confidence to strike out on her own. I walked to the elevator, stepped inside, and turned around for one last look at the office that had been my professional prison for 3 years. Then the doors closed, and I was free. I sat in my car for a moment, expecting to feel sad or scared or uncertain. Instead, I felt calm and completely sure of my decision. I was exactly where I needed to be, leaving at exactly the right time. I finally shared my business on LinkedIn, posting a simple announcement about my consulting services. Within 48 hours, I had 5 new client inquiries and dozens of messages from former colleagues and college friends. "I always knew you were going to do something amazing," they wrote. "This is so inspiring." People I hadn't spoken to in years were reaching out, asking for advice and congratulating me on my courage. Apparently, I wasn't as invisible as I'd thought. People had been watching my career and rooting for me, even when I felt completely alone and overlooked. My phone buzzed constantly with notifications, new followers, partnership proposals, speaking opportunities. Rachel, my first client, shared my post with her network, writing, "Maya is the consultant who transformed our entire company culture. Book her now before she gets too expensive." By the end of the week, I had enough new clients to replace my corporate salary entirely. The demand for my services was overwhelming in the best possible way. If you're enjoying this story of workplace triumph, please subscribe and hit that notification bell, because the best part is still coming. During a strategy session with my third new client, the CEO casually referred to me as "boss lady" while introducing me to her team. I smiled and said, "Actually, just Maya is fine." But inside, something had shifted. I was the boss now. I set my own schedule, chose my own clients, and determined my own worth. No one could interrupt me, dismiss my ideas, or make me feel small. I was building something meaningful, helping companies solve real problems, and earning more money than I'd ever imagined possible. My clients respected my expertise, implemented my recommendations, and referred me to their networks. I was finally working at the level I'd always known I was capable of, with people who recognized and valued my contributions. The contrast with my corporate experience was stark. All those years, I'd thought the problem was me. That I wasn't smart enough, confident enough, or valuable enough. Now I realized the problem had been the environment, specifically one toxic person who'd made it her mission to keep me down. A month after leaving my job, I received a meeting invitation that made my heart skip a beat. A major corporation wanted to discuss a consulting contract for their quarterly strategy session. The company name was familiar, but I didn't think much of it until I opened the meeting details. Listed as the primary contact and operations lead was Jessica Williams. My former boss needed my services. The irony was so perfect it almost didn't seem real. I stared at my laptop screen, reading her name over and over again. Jessica, who had told me I'd never be leadership material, was now reaching out to hire me as a leadership consultant. The same woman who had dismissed my ideas and interrupted my presentations now wanted to pay me to share my expertise with her company. I took a screenshot of the meeting invitation and laughed out loud in my empty apartment. The universe had a sense of humor after all. This was going to be interesting. I joined the video call at exactly 2 p.m., maintaining my professional composure despite my racing heart. When Jessica's face appeared on screen, her expression went through several stages of shock. She blinked twice, opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Maya," she finally managed to say, her voice higher than usual. I smiled warmly, as if running into an old friend. "Hi Jessica. I'm Maya Rodriguez, the consultant who'll be handling your leadership development project." The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. I could see her trying to process this role reversal, struggling to understand how her former subordinate had become the expert she was hiring. I didn't realize." She stammered. "Small world," I said pleasantly. Why don't we dive into your company's needs? For the first time in our professional relationship, I was the one in control of the conversation. It felt extraordinary. True to form, Jessica tried to dominate the meeting. She interrupted my presentation, nitpicked my slides, and questioned every recommendation I made. But this time, the dynamic was completely different. I held the mute button. I controlled the screen share. I had the contract and the expertise her company was paying for. When she became particularly difficult, I simply said, I can see we might need more time to align on objectives. Let me send over a revised proposal, and we can schedule a follow-up. Then I ended the meeting. 20 minutes later, I received a private message from her director, Maya. I apologize for Jessica's behavior during the call. We're very impressed with your approach and would like to move forward with your original proposal. Can we schedule a direct meeting to discuss terms? I replied immediately, maintaining my professional tone while privately celebrating this incredible validation. Jessica's own boss was apologizing for her conduct and asking to work with me directly. The tables had completely turned. They signed my contract. 6 figures for a quarterly leadership development program. It was my largest client yet, and the validation felt almost as good as the money. I celebrated that night with expensive sushi, sitting alone at the bar of my favorite restaurant and smiling like an idiot. The server asked if I was celebrating something special. You could say that, I told him. I just landed the biggest contract of my career. What I didn't mention was that the contract was with my former boss's company, or that Jessica would be attending every session I facilitated. The woman who had once mocked my outfit and told me I lacked leadership presence was now paying me consultant rates to teach her about leadership. I ordered another glass of wine and toasted to myself, to perseverance, and to the beautiful justice of watching someone who'd underestimated me become my client. This was better than any revenge I could have plotted. 2 weeks later, I walked back into the building where I'd been humiliated for 3 years. But this time, I was there as the invited expert, not the overlooked employee. The conference room was packed with executives and team leaders, all there to learn from my leadership program. Jessica sat in the front row, notebook and pen ready, trying to look engaged and professional. I set up my presentation and began with a slide that made several people sit up straighter. Today we're discussing what leadership isn't. I spoke about toxic management styles, the importance of empowering team members, and how real leaders create environments where everyone can thrive. I never mentioned Jessica by name, but every example I gave was drawn from my experience working under her. The room was completely engaged, asking thoughtful questions and taking detailed notes. Jessica's face grew redder with each point I made. She was finally getting the leadership education she desperately needed, delivered by the person she'd spent years trying to diminish. I never mentioned Jessica's name during the training, but I didn't need to. When I said, real leaders don't need to diminish others to feel powerful, I saw her flinch. When I discussed the importance of recognizing team members' contributions, she shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Sometimes, I said, looking directly at the group, the people you overlook are the ones building the future. Good leaders recognize potential everywhere, especially in the quiet voices that others might dismiss. The room nodded appreciatively, but Jessica's face had gone pale. She was smart enough to realize that this entire presentation was essentially a master class in everything she'd done wrong as a manager. Yet she couldn't say anything without admitting that she recognized herself in my examples of poor leadership. It was the perfect form of feedback, educational, professional, and completely unavoidable. She had to sit there and listen to a detailed critique of her management style, delivered by the person who'd suffered under it most. After the training session, Jessica sent me a LinkedIn message that evening. Hi Maya, great session today. I really learned a lot from your presentation. I'd love to reconnect outside of the work context and maybe learn from your entrepreneurial success. Would you be interested in grabbing coffee sometime? I think you could mentor me a bit as I work on developing my own leadership style. I read the message twice, marveling at the complete role reversal. Jessica wanted me to mentor her. The woman who had told me I'd never be leadership material was now asking for my guidance on how to lead. I replied professionally but coolly. Thanks for the feedback on today's session. I appreciate your interest in my work. My assistant handles my calendar for external meetings. I'll have her review my availability and get back to you. I never followed up. I never had my assistant contact her. Jessica could wait indefinitely for a response that would never come, just like I'd waited years for basic respect that never materialized. Every quarter now, Jessica's company pays my agency for ongoing leadership development services. And every quarter, I sign the invoice that gets processed through her department. The memo line reads, Leadership Development Services by Maya Rodriguez, CEO. I imagine her processing that payment, seeing my name and title on the official paperwork, remembering her prediction that I'd never amount to anything in leadership. The irony is delicious every single time. She has to authorize payments to the woman she once dismissed as lacking presence and potential. My business has grown exponentially since that first contract. I now employ 12 people, serve Fortune 500 companies, and speak at national conferences about leadership and workplace culture. Jessica's company remains one of my regular clients, though she's been notably absent from recent training sessions. I suspect attending my workshops became too uncomfortable for her, a constant reminder of how wrong she'd been about my capabilities and trajectory. I don't need a fancy corner office or an impressive corporate title to feel successful anymore. I lead my own team of talented consultants who I treat with the respect and recognition I never received. I set the rules, create the culture, and build the kind of workplace I'd always wanted to be part of. My business operates on principles that are the complete opposite of everything Jessica represented: collaboration over competition, empowerment over control, growth over stagnation. Every day, I help leaders become better versions of themselves, teaching them lessons I learned the hard way about what not to do. My name is Maya Rodriguez, and the woman who once told me I'd never be leadership material now signs checks with my name on them. She was wrong about my potential, wrong about my presence, and wrong about my future. But she was right about one thing: I am different from her. I actually know how to lead. Now let me hear your thought in the comments section. Have you ever had a boss who made you feel small? Have you ever been underestimated by someone in power? Comment below and share your experiences. And if this story inspired you to believe in your own potential, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. There are more stories of workplace triumph and justice coming your way. Thank you for watching.